Break me with your stupid face.
You always break first with a stupid face. Are we recording?
Yes. Just a bit about your stupid face.
Oh. For the record, Kieran started pulling a stupid face first, and then I sent it back in the wifely way that I have to, and he broke first. He started laughing. So I think we all know who the winner is here.
Me. Because you have a stupid face.
Also, we're currently drinking like rocket fuel coffee, so you're in for a wild ride this episode.
Here we are again. Back for the penultimate episode.
I know. I can't believe it. I'm quite sad.
I know.
I always get sad at the end of a season.
All two of them.
You know.
Yeah.
It's exactly how I felt last time. I was sad when the Witchcraft series was over.
Yep.
Because I was so proud of what we made.
Yeah.
It's always just a bit sad.
It's always just a bit sad. But from what I've heard, we've got a doozy today.
Oh man, I cannot wait to get into it with you. It's brutal and emotional and heartbreaking. So we already have the wrong energy.
So we are drinking coffee that's far too strong with condensed milk in it again.
Yes. Because it was a very late night last night. We have been very stressed and very busy. I was working until 3 a.m.
Yep. Getting this script together.
It's been a lot.
Yeah, but it's happening. We're here. We're recording. Everything's awesome. There's spooking. There's history.
But before we get to the spooking in history, we actually have a little podcast promo for you.
Yes, we do. From fellow podcasters, Misty Mountains. No?
That's not right even a little bit.
That's not even
no.
Misty.
Keely from Misty Mysteries has sent me her promo so that we could have it in the podcast. If you like what we do, you will definitely like what Keely does. Because Misty Mysteries is a true crime paranormal podcast.
Yep, and we've got her little promo to play you. So you can hear what like, and then you can get it anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Yes.
Spotify.
She's on Spotify.
Google Podcasts.
Yes.
Good Pods. All the good places.
You'll be able to find her. And I follow her on Instagram. That's how I found her. So she's on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere like that. So please check her out and please tell her that we sent you. Give her all of the love from the Scots. And roll the promo.
Roll the promo, and then roll the music, and then we'll get into it.
Very methodical. I like it. You're a man with a plan.
Man with a plan.
Hi, my name is Keely, and I host a podcast called Misty Mysteries. It is a paranormal and true crime podcast. I started this podcast, but after listening to so many true crime podcasts where I felt like it was focused on the killer, I decided to make a podcast where I could focus on the victims and who they were to help solve their cases. So on Wednesday, I cover a true crime case that is unsolved or it's a missing persons case in hopes to bring them home or bring them justice. And on Sunday, as something a little more lighthearted, I cover a paranormal topic. You can find my podcasts on places such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and Good Pods, and all your main listening podcast places. And I hope to see you there.
Coffee break.
Yeah, because we need more coffee.
I'm glad it stayed hot.
I know, condensed milk is so thick, I feel like...
Thick.
I was a bit worried it was just going to completely cool down the coffee.
Yeah, like cold. Not cold brew condensed milk coffee, just cold coffee.
I'm a very lucky lady. I don't know if we've talked about this much on the podcast, but Kieran runs a coffee blog called Above Average Coffee.
I do indeed.
And Kieran has learned how to make really nice coffee. So I get the benefit because I just get all the nice coffee without having to do any of the work.
Get it brought to you while I wear my butler outfit and call you ma'am.
Hell yeah. That's why the dog has a bow tie. How are you feeling? End of season 2. Just about.
I'm quite sad it's going to be coming to an end.
You feeling it too?
Had a good time though. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable.
It's been a really good season. I've enjoyed it.
That's always quite stressful, getting the last couple episodes out. So in that sense, I'm excited to get them done. But I'm not excited for it to finish.
The recording part is always nice.
Yeah.
There is a lot of work involved in getting to this point, which can be stressful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been so much fun.
Yeah.
Shall we get into it?
Yes.
Oh, actually, before we get into it...
Oh.
No, this is a good thing. This is a good thing.
I just want to get into
It's a good thing. We were sent some more ghost stories for our collage episode.
I suppose that is a good thing.
We share your stories that you've sent in, all your ghost stories. We got some more, so we're very close to having enough to put together an episode. So if you have a ghost story, even if it's just a paragraph, whatever, please send it in to us at generallyspooky@gmail.com.
Yes, please do.
Because we want to hear them.
Yep, and we're going to, once we've got a few, we're going to read them out. And by we, I mean Eilidh. It's going to read them out.
We could split it.
We could split it. I'm not very good at reading and speaking, though, which I feel is like a core skill for everything that needs to happen.
Maybe. Well, I'm happy reading them. That's fine. Also, thank you to everyone who has donated.
Yes,
since the last episode. Thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. We're still uncomfortable, but we appreciate it.
Yep.
If you'd like to donate to the podcast, there's a donate button over on the website.
Yep, at generallyspooky.com.
Yeah. That was all. That was all I had to say.
Everything we ask of you.
No, I just meant before getting into the story, you got all upset. That's all I had. That's all I have.
Okay,
we can start.
Well, that's good. It's about time.
Well, we've been recording for 5.5 minutes.
Come on. I want to hear the story. Too much coffee.
Yeah, maybe a little. I think you should take a deep breath. Okay. We have a heavy hitter this week. It's a biggie. And this is a story that I've wanted to talk about on the podcast since I came up with the idea for the podcast. It's one of the biggest stories from Scottish history. So even though I've put so many hours into this and looked into so much, I still feel like I haven't even scratched the surface. You know, which is fine. I'm not a professional historian. I just like telling stories. But today we are talking about the infamous, bloody Glencoe Massacre.
Oh.
Now this you have probably heard of.
I have.
And if you listening have any interest in Scottish history, there's a good chance you've just heard the name, the Glencoe Massacre, even if you don't really know what happened. The story's lingered for hundreds of years, and for good reason. Or bad reason.
Yeah.
Reason. Because no part of the Glencoe Massacre was good.
No.
At all.
Weirdly, we did it once while I was in school.
Oh, yeah?
And it was in, like, primary 5. So I was, like, 9. Which is very young for what is a very brutal story.
It is, yeah. It is quite young.
Because there was...
I suppose it depends which details you divulge.
Yeah. We just went over, like, the basics of it. But there was a MacDonald, a girl whose second name was MacDonald in our class. So that was just a fun connection.
Well, my granny is a MacDonald.
Yeah,
from a long line of MacDonalds. From Skye. They've been there a long time. So this is a story near and dear to my heart.
Yep.
If you're a Campbell, you may not enjoy this story. I'm just going to say it. I'm joking. Campbells are not. Everyone is welcome.
Except the Campbells, yes.
To understand what happened at Glencoe, we kind of have to understand and pick apart the clan system a little bit. Now, I feel like since the release of Outlander, loads more people understand the way that clans worked than they ever did before.
Yeah, probably.
Because they talk about it a lot in the show. It's a big thing.
I've not really seen Outlander.
Well, that is why I have put together an explanation for you.
Thank goodness.
Kieran, just for you. I thought about your needs and I'm catering to them the best of my ability.
I appreciate you.
Thank you. So, the clan system was basically the way in which the people of the Highlands in particular were structured. The clans definitely had more power in the Highlands rather than the lowlands of Scotland. And they were kind of a blend between the feudal system, which is where the land you lived on as a commoner belonged to a local lord or earl or whatever, and you owed them rent and payment to live there. But they were supposed to protect you from danger. That was kind of the deal.
From ghouls and goblins.
Or invaders. You know, either or. That was the feudal system in a very terrible nutshell. And this system influenced Scotland from the south. This was how things were run in England.
Okay.
And more in the lowlands. It was that kind of a system where you were less of a clan chief than you were a landlord. Roughly. But the clan system was a blend of this and a system that kind of came from the Picts, which was called tanistry, which I'll explain, because it explains a big part of how the clans worked. So a clan chief was usually chosen from a group of people who were deemed by the clan to be worthy of being chief.
Very good.
But they weren't necessarily related to the chief that came before. So it wasn't hereditary. It didn't really matter if you were related by blood or not. If you were worthy and you were the best man for the job, and it usually was a man, then you became clan chief.
The perfect hierarchy.
It works, I think.
Like exactly how hierarchies should be. You look at everybody and choose the best person for the job, and then they get the job of being in charge.
Exactly. Now, obviously, it's not a perfect system because, it could be rigged and...
Well, I mean...
social politics and all of that.
In essence, it's the perfect system.
Yeah. And if you became clan chief, it was your job to lead the clan, you had to protect your people, and you had to maintain order in your territory. Again, very brief, quick explanation. And a chief would usually choose their successor while they were still living. So the person that they chose, they might even have a position of power with the chief, kind of learning the ropes of the job. So it wasn't just after they died. Usually plans were put in place to ensure the continuation of the clan.
I like that.
And to keep everybody safe. And to make sure that they knew the job that they were getting into.
Take on I forgot what the word for that is. And it's not an heir.
Successor?
Yeah, just like... Yeah. Go with this.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, below the chief and his number 2 were the chieftains, who were the heads or leaders of different families that would make up a clan.
Not the chieflets.
No. Not a chieflet. It's not like a little chicken.
I think it's like the big chief and then there's the chieflets underneath.
I think if you said that to a chieflet, they would cut your head off. I'm going to go out on a limb.
I don't think they like it.
Now, this is important, understanding that lots of different families made up a clan. A clan wasn't just a huge, big group of people who were all related by blood who had the same name. That was a misconception that kind of came up in the Victorian times. That's not the way it was. A clan was a grouping of lots of families together under one leader. So the clan chief and his family name had priority, they had the power, but other people could be part of that clan without sharing that name.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just thought they all took the name without necessarily being related.
Well, sometimes they did. I don't think they did it all the time, but sometimes they would take on the clan name.
That's interesting.
But from what I can tell, that didn't always happen. And a family might join a bigger clan if they weren't big enough to defend themselves.
Seems fair.
Or if they fell on hard times, they might need the protection and the land that came with joining a clan. So yeah, it's important to know that that's the way it worked. Lots of different subsections of clans. But whether you were family by blood or not, being part of a clan was being part of something bigger than just yourself and the people you lived with. Your clan was your family. You had obligations to people that were in your clan. You were bound. You would live together in villages and across territory. You'd live on clan lands, and these were protected by the chief. So if you were living there, the chief had an obligation of protection to keep you safe, which was good for people who couldn't defend themselves. We talked about it in the Appin murder episode, but sending your children to live with other families within the clan was really common, especially if you were high up in the hierarchy. Because these children would learn from their foster family, and it would build connections within the clan, and it would stop feuding from happening.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Because you were growing up with other families.
Yeah.
And it was likely that you would marry within your clan as well. Remember that not everyone is genetically related, so this is fine. And the chief could be the one who set up your marriage. A chief was often a matchmaker, and this was another way that stopped individual families from falling out with each other and keeping the peace, that he would set up a marriage that would unite the families instead of having them at each other's throats. Another way of keeping peace, which was fairly common.
I like that.
Yeah, like it happened a lot throughout history. We've talked about that here before. Now, the clans started appearing in the early 11th century.
Okay.
I saw 1058 mentioned, but I have no way of backing that up.
I don't know when I would have thought when clans started.
Well, that was when what would turn into the clans that we know started. Over time, they became stronger and they became more defined. So they didn't start with what we have in our heads today.
Yeah.
It's to do with the fact that Scotland wasn't a united people for a very long time. You had different groups of different people, ancient people, all across Scotland. You had the Picts and the Gaels. They were all different, and they had their own kings and chiefs and things. That's kind of where it comes from.
That's interesting.
So they're becoming bigger, more defined, they have lots of power, but over time, and after some really big events that rocked the Highlands forever, the Battle of Culloden, the clearances, which we'll talk about in other episodes, the clan system kind of disappeared. But then in the 1800s, Scottish culture became an amazing fad and wild craze, which is awesome. But lots of parts of our history that had been erased or people had tried to get rid of came back, and people became very passionate for the Highland way of life, like tartan.
I think the Highland way of life's pretty sweet.
It is pretty sweet, I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty good.
I can see why people would dig it.
But clan tartans were brought back at this time. And I'm sorry if I'm the one revealing this to you, but clan tartans are kind of arbitrary. They didn't exist before the 1800s. You didn't have a clan tartan. The writer, Sir Walter Scott, had a lot to do with that, assigning tartans to different clans, because then people would buy it, and, lots of money there.
It's more romantic, isn't it?
Yes, that was kind of what he was all about, is creating that romantic image of the Highlands and Scotland generally. It's part of that. And I think that's why it stayed. I think that's why having a family tartan is still an important thing.
I like it.
Exactly.
I enjoy having the McRae tartan.
We've got a Stuart tartan blanket in the living room. It's become its own beast.
Yeah.
But when you were looking at the clan system originally, it didn't exist in the same way.
Because why? Like, it'd be an awful lot of extra effort to not be naked.
Well, not even... They weren't just naked.
It's just clothing. They just want a good piece of clothing. So they make a kilt. And then, I've got my kilt. Why would I put all this extra effort into, defining all the colours across it?
I thought it meant that they just didn't wear clothes.
No, they
did wear clothes.
I'm sure they were just busy doing other things instead of making, the tartan as we know it.
Well, it's awfully expensive to make lots of different tartans with lots of different colours.
Yeah.
And if you were wearing a bright tartan, that's no use for hunting.
It's no use for anything, really.
For stealth, So generally, I think, from what I understand, tartans were generally very muted. And the point of having a kilt or a plaid was it was really warm.
They are really warm. Incredibly
heavy. So, it's very cold here. That was the purpose of it, rather than clan identity.
Yeah, it's very much more practical. Which in my head is a very Highlands thing to do.
We're not really a romantic bunch.
No, it's far too practical.
Very pragmatic. No nonsense. The main thing that I want you to take away, that you need to understand for this story, is that your clan was your family. And the lands that belonged to the clan were your home. If the chief declared war, which I didn't know, I read that a clan chief needed permission from his clan to declare war.
Oh, nice.
He didn't have absolute autonomy. He had to go through a process of declaring war. And we generally tried to avoid it because it was very expensive.
Yeah.
But if the chief did declare war, you fought and you died with your brothers. It was a big thing. And with that, unfortunately, another big part of Highlander nature and history is that we fight with each other a lot, and there's lots of feuds that last over tens and hundreds of years. And at times this was caused because clans were raiding and thieving from each other. So, sometimes it was deserved.
Yep.
You were stealing cattle, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's not great.
And clans were quite often at odds with each other. And the feuds could run really deep over years and years, like I said. Turning to outright war was usually a last resort, though. Because that's a pretty drastic, course of action.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably heard of the Highland Charge before, Kieran.
I have.
The Highland Charge. Highlanders had a very distinctive fighting style, which I also think speaks to our very practical and no-nonsense approach to life, because it basically involved a Highlander army forming this initial, absolutely ferocious and really quick charge at the enemy. If you were fighting Highlanders, the first strike was the one you had to worry about, because it was the most lethal. So the clans were doing this to each other, so battles were over very quickly and could be very bloody. But the thing to know about these was there was no hiding. You fought your battles head on, and you faced your enemy. You didn't... There was nothing sneaky about it. That was the Highlander way.
Were you also naked? Is that a thing?
They could do. They used to paint themselves. That was a thing. War paint, war cries, pipes.
Oh, yeah.
Which I imagine if you had en masse would be very, very intimidating.
Yeah.
But something happened on the 13th of February, 1692, that went against just about everything that I've just talked about. Something happened that caused outrage throughout the Highlands and across clan lines even. And this was the Glencoe Massacre. We're going to start our story about 4 years before the massacre actually happened, so that we know why it happened. So we're in 1688.
A fine year.
Can you picture it?
Yep, I'm there.
Do you remember?
For some reason there's seagulls happening and I'm all up here. That's where my flashback place is, apparently.
It's probably where your family are from, to be fair.
Yeah. It's just my past lives coming through from my psychic powers.
You don't have psychic powers, you're a ham sandwich.
It's true.
In 1688, the Glorious Revolution happened, which we've talked a little bit about before, but we haven't really focused on. It's come up in other stories. But this was when King James VII and II,
Yep.
okay, he was booted off the throne because he was a Catholic and he had Catholic children.
Not just because he was an arsehole.
Well, that's debatable. But he was a Catholic and he was quite keen on pushing Catholicism across Britain.
Yes.
And converting the rest of the country, which made the Protestant majority quite nervous. They didn't want a Catholic king, they didn't want to be Catholic. They'd gone through the whole process of separating from the Pope and the Catholic Church, which we've talked about, all the Covenanters and everything. So King James was booted, and he was the son of King Charles II, who was the one who gave the Covenanters so much grief. He agreed to their terms, they made him king again, and then he went back on their arrangement.
Oh, cheeky bin.
I know. It's so stupid. Like, Charles II fought against the Covenanters, who were fighting for the right to pursue the Protestant faith. And then his son, King James VII and II, was kicked off the throne for being Catholic, since everyone was a Protestant.
Yeah. Very unjust.
Like, it's all over the place.
Yeah. Bizarre. It's just bizarre.
Charles is prosecuting the Protestants, and then the Protestants are prosecuting the king.
Yeah, what?
If you aren't exactly keeping up with this, then don't worry about it. It's fine. What you need to know is that in 1688, King James the Catholic was removed from the throne, and he was replaced with his daughter Mary, who became Mary II, and she was married to a man called William of Orange from Holland.
Yep, okay.
They were actually invited by Parliament to just come and take the throne. They reached out to them and said, do you want to be king and queen? Because we hate this guy. And they were like, okay, he's my dad, but whatevs.
Sure.
And the big thing is that they were Protestant, which is what the Parliament and everybody wanted.
What the people want.
Yeah. So King William III and Queen Mary II were made joint monarchs, after the 1688 Glorious Revolution. But a lot of Highlanders weren't happy about this, because a lot of Highlanders were Catholics.
Oh, I thought the Highlanders were Protestants.
No, a lot of Highlanders were Catholics.
Interesting.
So they, not all of them,
No.
it varies, but they supported James, and they wanted him on the throne. They were Jacobites.
Oh, shit.
Now there's a word you'll have heard before.
Yep.
Yes. This is when the term was kind of first coined, and it basically just means supporters of James. In 1689, the first Jacobite rising happened, and this was to try and win back the throne for James. He had fled to France when he was deposed, but then he returned from France. He landed in Ireland, because there were people in Ireland who supported him too. And some of the Highland clans banded together. They won the Battle of Killiecrankie.
Yep.
Which we've talked about.
Killiecrankie.
But ultimately they weren't successful, because King James didn't become King of England and Scotland again.
I wonder why they're called Jacobites and not like Jamesites, if they're followers of James.
Well, no, it comes, I think it's the Latin version of James. It comes from Jacobus. The word Jacobus. So Jacobite.
So I think because an ite is like a follower of, but that makes more sense.
The era that James is on the throne is the Jacobean era. So I think it comes from the Latin, like the root of his name.
Makes sense.
I think. Don't know.
Doesn't really matter.
Jamesists.
Jameslets.
Jameslets. No. Well, King William had won, but he was pretty concerned, because he really needed to maintain and establish some kind of control in the Highlands, which wasn't something that many of the kings had achieved before.
Yep.
We are famously savage and stubborn.
So there's a big old wall someone tried to build to attest to that.
Yeah, but he really wanted to maintain order, because he was having to send soldiers north to try and prevent uprisings and rebellion. And he needed these soldiers for a war that was happening in France. The 9 Years' War. So he didn't really like that he was having to be splitting his manpower. He wanted all of his soldiers in one place. He didn't want to have to be dealing with all this shit. By the time 1690 came, King William knew that something had to be done. So he chose a man called John Dalrymple to see it through.
That's a name.
We're going to be talking a lot about him.
Mr. Dalrymple.
He's an arsehole. But he was the Secretary of State for Scotland.
Okay.
That was his job. He worked with the government. He was pro-King William. And the king charged him with the task of striking some kind of a deal with the clan chiefs who had rebelled against King William. He wanted Dalrymple to strike a deal that would force them to bow to William's rule and forget any ideas they'd had of James being on the throne.
It's a tough deal to get to. Well, that's not an easy job.
No, I can't imagine being pleased that that's your task.
Yeah.
But from what I'm about to tell you, it might be that Dalrymple was pretty pleased that he was the one that was tasked with doing this.
Maybe, because I'm like, okay, I need you to just change your mind 180 degrees on everything. What do you think? No. So I'm curious, if he manages, what does he offer them? Money?
Well,
Land,
luckily we're going to get to it.
Well, that's
Aren't
good.
you glad?
That's good. If we just ended now, I'd just be sitting here with my historical blue balls.
Yep, that's the episode. Troll everyone. I didn't actually get it finished in time. From all accounts, Dalrymple was a bad guy. I'm just going to come out and say it. It might be a hot take. It might not be a nice thing to say, because I try to be unbiased as far as history goes, but he seems like he was a bad guy. I have a quote describing him from Thomas Macaulay's History. The book's called History. But we're going to talk about Macaulay later too, because he was wildly biased. So don't trust everything that he says, because I have a lot of quotes from his history book, and dubious. Dubious is the word. Dalrymple was one of the first men of his time, a jurist, a statesman, a fine scholar, an eloquent orator. His polished manners and lively conversation were the delight of aristocratic societies, and none who met him in such societies would have thought it possible that he could bear the chief part in any atrocious crime.
Well, there's nothing I love more than an aristocratic society.
Do you hate him already?
Yeah.
It goes on. He had no personal reason to wish the Glencoe men ill. There had been no feud between them and his family. His property lay in a district where their tartan was never seen. Yet he hated them, with a hatred as fierce and implacable as if they had laid waste his fields, burned his mansion, murdered his child in the cradle. The most probable conjecture is that he was actuated by an inordinate, an unscrupulous, a remorseless zeal for what seemed to him to be the interest of the state.
I can just feel you dripping with sarcasm as you're writing or reading.
Oh, it's because they just... it just annoys... But you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
That he had absolutely no association with the MacDonalds of Glencoe.
Yep.
At all. Just to prove to you how much I don't like him. This is what Macaulay went on to say about Dalrymple further in the book. He justly thought it monstrous that a third part of Scotland should be in a state scarcely less savage than New Guinea. Like, what? Why?
What does that even mean?
That letters of fire and sword should, through a third part of Scotland, be, century after century, a species of legal process, and that no attempt should be made to apply a radical remedy to such evils. The independence effected by a crowd of petty sovereigns, their wars, their robberies, their fire-raisings, their practice of exacting blackmail from people more peaceable, and more useful than themselves, naturally excited the disgust and indignation of an enlightened and politic gownsman who was a lover of law and order. Right. Nobody tells me what to do.
Well, see, that's like, I'm hearing all that, I'm like, I bet all the Highlanders are just kind of there minding their own business, like, sweet, yeah, this is our land, we're in our clan, we're all doing well. And somebody marched in and went, we're going to pay you for the right to be here. And they go, no, sorry, you have to pay us for the right to be here. And he goes, well, fuck you, I've always been here doing this, why am I paying you now to carry on doing what I was doing before?
Right, I steal my neighbour's cow, right? But we deal with it ourselves.
Yeah.
Don't need you coming in and telling me how I should be punished for doing what I've always done.
Yeah, it's just, we've got this sorted. Like, go away. Like, the only reason you're annoyed is we're not paying you to exist. We're just trying to exist. Ugh.
So it's just to kind of put you in the mindset.
Hating this guy.
of where Dalrymple was mentally.
Yes.
And how he felt about Highlanders generally.
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen Dalrymple's portrait, and he looks like a right arsehole. Mm. And he wasn't just the Secretary of State, either. He was actually the Lord Advocate.
Oh, okay.
Like, the top lawyer.
Yeah,
and he was the Lord Advocate after George Mackenzie, who we talked about in our Greyfriars Kirkyard episode.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. He was his successor.
Yes. So that's where we are, post-Covenanter.
Covenanter.
Now, Dalrymple decided that the way he was going to bring the chiefs to heel was by giving them money. He was going to pay them off.
If you're going to try anything, you try that first if you have money, you know.
And the Scottish government agreed with his plan. They agreed to pay the Jacobite chiefs, the ones who had pledged their allegiance to King James, a total of £12,000.
Very nice.
This was worth considerably more back then.
Yep.
From what I could see, £1,000 back then would be worth about £66,000 now.
I'd have thought it'd be more than that in 1680.
The inflation rates I used could be totally wrong, and if I'm totally wrong, I would love to hear that I'm totally wrong, because I'm curious to know what the answer is.
You're totally wrong, Hayley.
Why would you say that? But this would mean that the £12,000 that they were being offered would be worth about £80,000 today. And this was to be split between them.
Yeah, I suppose it's like relative purchasing power as well. Like, you know, they didn't need to buy a new iPhone or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That
Doesn't
could
really
be
matter.
completely false, and I shall update if I get better information. The clan chiefs, surprisingly, actually decided to accept this offer. But they didn't accept it until 1691. It took a long time to negotiate a deal. And this deal was called the Declaration of Highlander. Highlander? I should look it up.
Bullskin house all over again.
Oh, I know. I'll never be confident again.
Acolyder.
That's not right.
No.
Acolyder.
Acolyder?
Maybe?
Acolyder.
Okay.
Acolyder.
That declaration. And a man called the Earl of Breadalbane, whose actual name was John Campbell. I'm going to refer to him as Breadalbane for the sake of ease.
Mr. Breadalbane to you.
Earl Breadalbane.
Oh.
He signed this deal on behalf of the government. So he's a Highland chief. He was chief of Clan Campbell. So he's signing for the government. He's on the side of the government. But the clan chiefs also signed this document, agreeing that they would support King William in exchange for this money. You with me?
I'm with you.
Now, the money was supposed to be divided up between the clan chiefs, like I said. But part of the deal was that the chiefs themselves were the ones who had to decide how this was going to be divvied up.
Oh, no.
Which was the biggest problem with this plan.
Oh.
Because for a long, long time, they couldn't decide how to split it up between them. And Breadalbane was part of this. He had a bit of beef with...
Everybody.
yeah, but particularly with the MacDonalds, with Clan Donald. Because the MacDonalds had been raiding his land and stealing from him over many years. So his idea was, well, you shouldn't get as much because you've been stealing from me. So part of your share is going to pay me for everything you stole.
Yep, I can see a lot of that.
So he's not necessarily wrong, but the MacDonalds weren't up for that. So,
I can see it all as the argument that Joey and Ross have in Friends, that I should date her.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but here's a counterpart. I think I should date her. So, you know what? I should get all of this money, and you shouldn't get any. What do you think? Oh, interesting. Because I was thinking, I should get all of this money. Oh, you do you? See? Because I think you're both wrong. I think I should get all of this money.
Yeah, it seems like that was a big problem. There were lots of different branches of Clan Donald that were having to agree this deal. So that's why I want to say at the start that there's lots of different parts of a clan and lots of different families in a clan. Clan Donald was huge, but it had different smaller clans that made up the big clan.
Clanlets, yep.
So we're just adding lits to everything. So they were all fighting, and Breadalbane's trying to oversee it all on behalf of the government. And it probably wouldn't have been so difficult if Breadalbane hadn't been a Campbell, because the Campbell and the MacDonalds had been feuding for years.
Yeah.
One of the smaller clans that had to negotiate this deal were the MacDonalds of Glencoe, who I mentioned, who are a big part of this story, if you haven't guessed. And they were led by a man called Alistair MacIan. Now, I'm going to refer to him as MacIan from here. They, in particular, were at odds with the Campbells because of all the raiding and the thieving. And among the people who didn't like the MacDonalds, the people who supported the Protestant cause, they had a really bad reputation as being raiders and thieves and savages and all of this. Which wasn't necessarily true, but they did do things like that. They were staunch, like Catholics and Jacobites, so there's a natural friction there. Because the Campbells had supported getting rid of King James. You can see the problem.
Yeah.
I will say it's important to point out at this point that clan chiefs could also be quite fickle, because a lot of the time they were out for their own interest and the interest of their clan, rather than taking a rigid, like, moral or religious or political stance. Sometimes they weren't all that bothered about what England was doing. They were more interested in just protecting their borders and their people. So they could be quite fickle. They could kind of play the game. I will say that. But because they couldn't all decide how they were going to split up this fortune of money, they couldn't take their oaths pledging allegiance to King William, because the deal hadn't been struck.
Yep.
Which frustrated the king, because he wanted this dealt with. And Dalrymple was getting a lot of shit, because he was supposed to have sorted this out, and it's still ongoing, and nothing's been sorted. You know.
Yep.
You've asked someone to do something, and it's just a shit show, and you feel like you have to come in and do it yourself.
They've done 80% of it, you know?
Yes.
Here's the deal everyone's basically happy with. It's just dotting the I's, crossing the T's. But that's fucking impossible.
Yes, because they all hate each other, or are all shouting with each other. By August of 1691, King William was absolutely fed up, basically. Nothing was moving. Mm-hmm. So he offered the Jacobite chiefs full pardons for the 1689 rising, which is a big deal, because it was directly against him. Mm-hmm. It's treasonous, basically.
Yep.
Traitorous, maybe that's the word. But they would only get these pardons if they took the oath before the 1st of January 1692.
Okay.
And this is important. They had a deadline. If they didn't take the oath before the 1st of January, they would be facing severe consequences. The clans were strong, they had their own men, and they were a formidable force, but the king's army was brutal. There was a lot more men, they had a lot more firepower. So the clans were potentially facing destruction if they didn't agree to these terms. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. They've got to get it done.
Yeah. So he's basically lit a fire under their ass. But if you don't do it by this time, then I'm going to end you. And the chiefs were in a tricky spot because of this. They knew the danger. They weren't stupid. But even though pledging their allegiance to William seemed like the smartest thing to do,
yep,
they'd already made binding oaths to King James. So what was going to happen if they broke them? Even though it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
Interesting. What do they do?
Well, Kieran, they actually reached out to James and they asked him for permission to accept William's terms.
I can't see him going for it.
Well, they made the case that it was going to keep them safe. They did this in October of 1691. They made the case that it was the safest option for them, but they worded it quite carefully. They tried to ask James if he was going to be able to mount an invasion before the deadline, because if he could do that, they wouldn't agree.
Well, yeah, because it's like, oh, keep us safe. I'm like, no, I'm prepared for all of you to die for me. Yes. I want power, even if it means every one of you has to die. I'm not going to. I don't lead the charge. Oh, thanks, man. That's totally
sweet. Yeah, so that was what they asked. They were really hoping that, they could meet the deadline. Because it's not like they could just send an email.
No.
Like, word had to get all the way to France and back from James. And they, like I said, they sent this in October. The deadline is January. And permission from James to pledge to King William didn't get back to the Highlands until the 12th of December.
Ooh, oh, he went for it though.
He did, yep.
Fair play.
Because he couldn't mount an invasion. He couldn't perform any kind of coup or attack. Yep. So he gave the chiefs permission to save themselves, basically.
Well, that's good, if a little late.
But yeah, they only got word back on the 12th of December. So they have about 2 weeks to take the oath before New Year. So they've got to shift.
Well, I mean, getting somewhere in 1691 in winter.
Exactly. This is a big part of the problem.
That's not easy.
A lot of them, the clan chiefs had to take the oath, and a lot of them had to travel so that they could give the oath to an official person who could legally accept their oath. I'm assuming it's kind of like having a notary present. Oh, yeah. That's someone who can objectively witness this being taken and can testify to the authenticity of it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. MacDonald of Keppoch, he was a subsect of Clan Donald, like I was saying. Keppoch is quite near Kyle. He had to travel all the way to Inverness to take his pledge.
That's a fair way.
MacDonell of Glengarry, he had to go all the way to Fort William.
I don't know where Glengarry is, but I assume that's quite far.
Yes. Where are we?
The Keppoch is also an excellent restaurant just outside Inverness, next to the battlefield in Culloden.
So good. Yeah, if you're going to Culloden Battlefield for a visit, you should go to the Keppoch.
For dinner after.
I actually think it's called the Culloden Moor Inn. I think the Keppoch is the old name.
Oh.
Anyway.
Doesn't really matter.
Where are we? I can't see it now. I think it's north of Fort William.
Okay. Was it Glengarry?
Yeah. Like the hat.
I was that's the name of the hat.
It was a fair distance. I'm not going to get too bogged down in it. But he had to go all the way to Fort William to find someone who could take his oath. And horses can only go so fast. Mm-hmm. And on top of that issue with the weather and the distance, there was kind of a weird chicken game that happened with some of the chiefs where they agreed to make the oath because James said they could. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them left it as late as they could so that they still held favour with Jacobite supporters, but would also receive the protection of the king by taking the oath.
Very nice, very nice.
They didn't want to appear too keen.
Yeah. Oh, fuck it, I'll go whenever I go. Oh, fuck it, I need to get there on time. But
Yeah.
I don't want to seem too eager.
That seems to be what happened with a few of them.
Interesting.
Now, I've seen lots of reasons, and there's been several different dates in this next part of the story. But this is how taking the oath went for MacIan of Glencoe. Okay. He didn't get the news that James was allowing them to take William's oath until late December.
Ooh.
Like the 29th or the 30th of December.
That's very late.
That is very close to the 1st of January. MacIan had agreed to taking it. He wasn't going to let it pass him by, so he left Glencoe immediately for Fort William. Which is about 16 miles away from Glencoe. Okay. It's not to say the route he would have taken was that long, but I looked at the walking route that exists now between Glencoe and Fort William, and it's about 16 miles. So it's not terribly far, but this is December, and the weather in and around Glencoe can be famously terrible in terms of snow and just everything. So everything was kind of working against him here. MacIan did make it to Fort William. And this is when Fort William was like a garrison of troops. It worked more as a fort than as a town like it is now. But when he tried to take the oath, he was told by the men there that he couldn't take it.
They just wouldn't let him.
Well, there was no one at the fort who could legally accept it.
Oh no.
The governor of Fort William was a man called Lieutenant Colonel John Hill, who will reappear in the story. And he turned MacIan away.
Oofed.
He wouldn't accept it.
That's the hill he wants to die on?
So now what?
There's a question. What does he do next?
What would you do?
What would I do? Maybe try... it's a long... I was going to say maybe like try and go to Edinburgh, but that's a long old way.
Yeah.
To just like... to get there late and then explain what happened.
Well,
like
that's weeks, I would say, to get to Edinburgh.
Yeah, from Fort William.
By foot or by horse.
By foot or horse at the beginning of January. I don't even know. Try again in Inverness. That's a bit closer. I don't know.
Well, MacIan had no choice but to make the trek from Fort William to Inverary.
Oh, okay.
Which is the heart of Campbell Power in the Highlands.
Oh, yeah, that came up in the Appin Murder episode. Yes,
because there would be someone there who would be able to take his oath. He was sent there by the people at Fort William, and he was sent with a letter from Hill, the Lieutenant Colonel, saying that he had arrived within the window to Fort William, but there was no one there to take the oath.
I wonder why he couldn't do it.
I don't know.
I don't know who knows?
I don't know what the requirements were. I don't know if because he was a soldier, he wasn't a political man.
Who knows what the admin requirements were in
like he was an officer.
1690s.
I'm not sure, but that's what happened. In case you didn't know, it's roughly 70 miles from Fort William to Inverary. 70 miles.
Across New Year.
In raging snow and wind and cold.
Eesh.
But he had to take the oath, because if not, it puts his entire clan at risk, his entire family.
Well,
he had to do everything he could to take this oath before the 1st of January. So he left for Inverary.
Pulled up his socks, tightened his kilt.
I mean, like, I can't even imagine how awful that would be. And I feel like being able to travel by car is something I definitely just take for granted.
Absolutely.
Like, how easy is it to get from here to Inverness to go see Granny?
Yeah. Well, I always think that because, like, I think average it's like 10 to 15,000 miles a year in a car. Imagine trying to walk that. Imagine not doing that by car. Like, that's a ridiculous amount of miles to travel every year.
Well, imagine how different our lives would be if we had to walk to the shops in Nairn.
Yeah, like, we're 5 miles from the supermarket.
You know, like, it's not far, not really, but if you have to walk it all the time... Mental.
Not good.
McKeon travelled through the terrible weather and the dangerous terrain, although he knew it better than most people.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't make it to Inverary until the 2nd of January.
Oh, painfully close.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, what are they going to do?
He's arrived after the deadline, probably sweating a little because he knows it's the day after. But it got even worse than just him arriving late. Do you want to take a guess at what happened?
Nobody there?
Nobody there. Oh. He's in Inverary, he's in the heart of his enemy's territory, ready to effectively kneel for a king that he didn't support, and the man who was supposed to take his oath wasn't there.
But I suppose it's after the deadline. Why would he be there? He's probably reporting...
Well...
back.
The Sheriff of Argyll was the man that McKeon was trying to find, and this was a man called Colin Campbell, and I assume he's somehow related to the Colin Campbell of the Appin Murder episode. But I couldn't find a direct genealogical link, so we'll leave that as it is. He wasn't even in Inverary, because he was away celebrating Hogmanay. Shit.
Ooh, that's rough.
Colin Campbell didn't actually return for several days. And McKeon didn't take the oath until the 5th or 6th of January. I've seen both.
Oh, but he did manage to take it.
He did. Campbell let him take the oath. He was very reluctant to do it because he was past the window.
Yeah.
He very nearly refused him completely, but McKeon had that letter from Fort William saying that technically he did make it within the window, it's just there was nobody who could take it.
You can just text ahead.
No.
Coming over, you in.
So technically he was within the deadline. And that was the understanding because he was allowed to then take the oath. You with me?
Yep.
So kind of by proxy and technicality, he was within the window.
Technically, you're allowed to take the oath, even though I hate you.
Yeah. So McKeon left. He went home. And he left with the knowledge that he'd achieved what he set out to do.
Oh.
And that the MacDonalds of Glencoe were safe because of everything that had happened.
I don't think I've ever heard of someone called McKeon.
No, not really. I don't think I've heard of that surname. Unfortunately for McKeon, schemes were already afoot by this point that he had no knowledge of. And he was not as safe as he believed.
Well, he's busy doing a 190-mile round trip.
Yeah. Way back at the start of December. So, Dalrymple, you remember Dalrymple, the dick? He had sent a letter to Breadalbane, who is the Campbell leader on the side of the government, who was signing the deal and everything. Dalrymple sent him a letter, and in this letter he said, quote, Clan Donald must be rooted out.
Oh.
This is a whole month before the deadline. Even further back, in the autumn of 1691, a man called James Hamilton was made a lieutenant colonel at Fort William, just the same as Hill, the same rank. And Hamilton was someone that Dalrymple really trusted and got on well with. Apparently, he didn't really get on with Hill very much, but Hamilton he really liked. And in December, a month before the deadline, like I said, Dalrymple sent a letter to Hamilton at Fort William. And Fort William is fairly close to Glencoe. It's kind of further around the coast. It makes more sense if we see it on a map, but there's like a sea lock. And so Fort William is very close to Glencoe. And Dalrymple said, It may be shortly we may have use of your garrison, for the winter time is the only season in which we are sure the Highlanders cannot escape us, nor carry their wives, bairns, and cattle to the mountains. The Clan Donald is generally popish, and I well know that neither Glengarry, Keppoch, Appin, Lochiel, nor some other chieftains can well sleep, being within a good night's march of your garrison.
Yeesh.
If that doesn't give you at least a little bit of dread in your belly, then I don't know what will.
What does popish mean?
Popish, Catholic.
Oh, okay.
Supporting of the Pope. So this is the start of December.
Not just pooping in the woods.
Not pooping in the woods. That's a different joke.
Oh, so he's getting all this in motion in advance. So is Mick Ian of the MacDonalds.
Yes, he's the chief of the MacDonalds of Glencoe.
Yep.
So it's not good.
It's not good news.
Saying that we'll soon have need of all the soldiers at Fort William.
Yeah. Who are there being like, oh mate, you can't come in here, sorry. Oh, ooh. Hey man, you alive? Oh yeah, why wouldn't you be? Okay, bye.
A few days later, in a different letter, Dalrymple spoke about how if they were to attack the MacDonalds, they being the government, people would support them because the MacDonalds were known Catholics.
Oh.
And on top of that, they were Highlanders. And they were seen as barbaric by people down south. So he felt that the government and the troops would have the support of the people if they launched an attack. Now, as far as McKeon's oath goes, the document that he signed and that was legitimised didn't get to the people it was supposed to. Colin Campbell, the Sheriff of Argyll, he sent it to Edinburgh like he was supposed to. He's not at fault. But instead of being brought before those who would confirm the MacDonald's protection, it was kept private.
Oh no.
And then it was decided that the document wasn't valid.
Oh, sketchy.
According to some sources I read, it seemed like the fact that McKeon had taken the oath at all was completely hidden. They acted as if he hadn't taken it, even though he did. God. And it seems like Dalrymple was responsible for this. For making it seem like he was rebelling when he wasn't.
But he's so upstanding in the aristocratic society.
Doesn't matter. On January 7th, so this is just after McKeon's taken the oath, Dalrymple sent a letter to the military commander in Scotland, a man called Thomas Livingston. And in this letter, he said he wanted to, quote, destroy entirely the country of Lochaber, Lochiel's lands, Kepix, Glengarry and Glencoe.
Oofed. That's a proclamation and a half.
On January 9th, Dalrymple goes further. In another letter to Livingston, he says that, quote, their chieftains all being papists, it is well the vengeance falls there. For my part, I regret the MacDonalds had not divided, and Keppoch and Glencoe were safe.
Oh my God.
So he's basically saying that he wished the MacDonalds hadn't taken the oath because he wanted to launch an attack. But because they had bent the knee, he didn't have a valid reason.
Fucking hell.
So he knew that they had taken the oath.
Yeah.
That's what this letter proved. But he behaves later like it never happened.
Whoa.
He wanted to make an example of them. And he basically wanted to show that the Highlanders could be brought to heel and controlled with an act of force, basically.
Yeah.
This is why I set up from the beginning that he's a bad guy.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Finally, on the 11th of January, Dalrymple wrote to Livingston again. And in the letter he wrote, my Lord Argyll, so that's the Earl of Argyll, tells me Glencoe has not taken the oaths, at which I rejoice.
Oh no.
When I told you before we started recording that parts of the story would make you angry, this is one of them.
Yeah. Whoa. Oh my God, what an asshole. Oh, you're right.
See? Like, Dalrymple's pretty gleeful that it seems like there was an error, that McKeon actually hadn't taken the oaths like everyone said he had. There was a mistake.
Oh, great, we get to murder them all now. Yes!
So in the eyes of the government, and he's the Secretary of State for Scotland and Lord Advocate, McKeon hasn't taken the oath that would protect him from government forces, even though he had.
That's insane.
So Dalrymple was going to get to make an example out of the MacDonalds, who he hated the very idea of.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah, you can see where the wind is blowing.
Yep. Ugh.
Now, there seems to be a few reasons that out of all the Highland clans that supported James, the MacDonalds of Glencoe were the ones who were effectively marked for death.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Because it wasn't just because he had taken the oath late. Because there were other clan chiefs, other MacDonalds even, who took the oath later than he did, and it was accepted. I think one of the places I read that the Kepics took the oath on the 4th of February.
Oh, and that's super late.
And it was accepted.
Oh.
The first reason is that striking any kind of blow to Clan Donald would be a strike against the whole Highlands. And that's what Dalrymple wanted, because Clan Donald were one of the biggest and most influential clans. They were the ones who used to have the Lord of the Isles.
Oh,
if you remember,
cool.
We talked about that before, but then King James stole the title from them.
Yeah.
So striking against the MacDonalds would be a big victory in kind of deflating some of the power of the clan chiefs. And it seems like the Glencoe MacDonalds were singled out in particular because they were a smaller clan. And they had this reputation, like I said, of lawlessness and savagery. But another reason is because of where they lived. So if we think about the geography here for a minute, like I know you love to do because you took geography, it's your passion. You don't have to hide it. I don't know if you've been to Glencoe before.
Don't think so, actually.
It's quite narrow, and the sides are quite steep. It's a glen, it's a valley. And there's big mountains in and around Glencoe. And it's all quite barren. There's not a lot of trees. It's quite a harsh landscape, but it's so beautiful. It's just, when you imagine the Highlands, I imagine you think of Glencoe from the outside. But the fact that the glen was so narrow was a big problem for the MacDonalds because it limited potential escape routes if someone were to, say, attack them.
Yeah, if you're just stuck in this big valley.
Exactly. You kind of only have two ways in and out at the end of the valley because it'd be very difficult to escape through the mountains. So they were easy targets.
Yeah. So what are we talking here? U-shaped valley? V-shaped valley?
I don't know. I took history. Duh. Now, another lovely Dalrymple letter, this time to Lieutenant Colonel Hill, who turned McKean away at Fort William. This letter from Dalrymple says that the Earl of Argyll and the Earl of Breadalbane, who were both Campbells, had agreed that they would support the government and they would use their manpower, their men in their clan, to prevent any kind of escape from Glencoe, because each of them were based at either end of the glen. Fort William is to the north, which is where the Earl of Argyll's regiment were based. Is that right? I can't remember. And Kinlochleven is to the south, which is where Breadalbane was. Unless it's the other way round. But basically, each of them were stationed at either end of the glen, so they could block it in. But even this seems iffy, because Dalrymple wrote this, even though Argyll and Breadalbane hadn't agreed to that.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was about to happen.
So he's just bluffing. What an asshole.
But yeah, he had a plan. Basically, he wanted to launch an attack on McKean and the MacDonalds of Glencoe. And what he wanted was to wipe them out completely. In another letter, he wrote so many letters, from the 30th of January, Dalrymple explains that if the government are going to attack the MacDonalds, then the best hope they have is using secrecy. That's going to be the most important thing to ensure complete success. Because if any hint of their plan reached the MacDonalds or any of the surrounding clans, they would get away.
Yeah.
No one could know what they were planning to do. Not even the ones who would end up doing it.
Oh.
Dalrymple enlisted the service of the Earl of Argyll's regiment of foot for the job, which was 2 companies, which is about 120 men in all. Now, the Earl of Argyll was a Campbell, like I said, but to be clear, the majority of these soldiers weren't Campbells. This is a common misconception that's fed down through history. Only about a dozen soldiers in these companies had the Campbell name.
Oh, interesting.
Because of the way the clans work.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of these two companies, more soldiers were stationed at Ballachulish and Kinlochleven to prevent any MacDonalds escaping from the Glen. But they didn't know why they were there.
Interesting.
You with me?
Yeah.
Now, the commander of all those men, the two companies, was a man called, or is that clear? The commander of the Earl of Argyle's regiment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that... Yeah. He was a man called Robert Campbell of Glenlyon, who I'll call Glenlyon from here. Otherwise, I'm calling everyone Campbell. And now, Glenlyon was kind of a pitiful character. He was in charge of this big group of soldiers and was effectively in charge of this massacre, but I don't think he was a complete monster from what I've read. He was in his 60s by the time the Glencoe Massacre happened, and he was forced to join the army because he was riddled with debt.
Oh.
And he needed money, and part of the reason for that was because he drank too much. So he had this title and everything, but he drank it away, so he had to join the army.
Oh no.
And he had also been the target of raids that had been carried out by the MacDonalds several years earlier.
Uh-huh.
And this had impacted him financially as well. So the MacDonalds were part of the reason that he had to join the army. And then he led the Glencoe Massacre.
Interesting.
In a very strange twist of fate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing you might not have expected is that Glenlyon's niece was married to one of MacIan's sons.
Oh.
And this kind of muddies how we see him, because on the one hand, some people say that he considered the MacDonalds his family because of the marriage. Like I said, that's how that worked.
Yep.
But on the other hand, I read that he was described as having a heart as black as peat.
Yeah.
And in that same description, it said that as soon as the MacDonalds saw that Robert Campbell was involved in anything the soldiers were doing, they should have been scared. That his very presence there should have told them that he was there for them.
Oh no.
Basically.
Yeah.
And just a heads up, it's only getting worse from here. I hope this is all making sense. I feel like it's quite confusing. Now, I said before, no one really knew what was happening. And this went for Glenlyon too. He and his men were given orders to move into Glencoe, and they were going to be billeted with the families there in small villages up and down the Glen from February 1st.
What's billeted?
I'm getting to it. If you don't know, when soldiers are billeted, it means that they're put up by civilians in their homes.
Oh.
So the Glenlyon and his men were billeted with the villages in Glencoe, so they were living with them. And he and his men were provided accommodation, places to sleep. They were fed. They were given drink by the MacDonalds for 12 days.
Oh no.
Now, I want to talk about the fact that hospitality is a huge part of Highland culture.
Yeah.
Which, Kieran, you know, I can tell by the grimace on your face, you know.
Yeah.
And probably Scottish culture generally. And I'm sure other cultures too. But I can only speak from my experience. Being hospitable to your guests in the Highlands is a big deal. And it certainly was back then. It was arguably an even bigger deal. There were obligations that you had if you had guests, even if you didn't know them. If you had guests, you had to treat them as if they were your own family. You fed them well, you entertained them, you protected them as if they were your own. That was the job of the host. So when the soldiers appeared and the MacDonalds found out that, you know, they had to take them in, they were billeted there, they didn't hesitate. The soldiers were welcomed into their homes.
Yeah.
And they assumed that this was a test of their loyalty to the king because MacIan had just taken the oath a month previously. So they figured, okay, we need to look after these soldiers well because we're being tested. And they didn't fear the soldiers like they would have done a couple months before because MacIan had taken the oath.
Taking the oath, so they're protected. They're protected by these soldiers.
Yes.
I'm dying.
Yeah. Over these 12 days, the MacDonalds shared precious food stores with the troops, because remember, it's winter. They had drinks together, which again is an important part of Scottish culture. I'd say most people know that. And some stories even suggest that they played shinty together. They had ceilidhs together with dancing, romances together for 12 days. And the soldiers don't know why they're there. This is important. Nobody who is there as a soldier knows why they're in Glencoe.
I'm curious how they're going to find out.
I'm literally about to tell you. This isn't nice. The 12th of February rolled around. The soldiers had been enjoying the MacDonalds hospitality for 11 days, which is a long time, when Glenlyon received his orders from his superior officer, who was a man called Major Duncanson. And Glenlyon was finally let in on the plan with this letter, his written orders. And this is what the actual orders said. This document still existed after all of this happened, and this is what it actually said. Ooh, burp.
God.
Are you ready?
No.
Just put yourself in his mind space for a minute. You've been staying with these people for 11 days, and you didn't know why you were there. The assumption was that you were just testing that they were actually looking after you, yada yada.
You've been having a good time.
You have just received this letter. You are hereby ordered to fall upon the rebels, the MacDonalds of Glencoe, and put all to the sword under 70. You are to have a special care that the old fox and his sons do upon no account escape your hands. You are to secure all the avenues that no man escape. This you are to put into execution at 5 of the clock precisely, and by that time or very shortly after it, I'll strive to be at you with a stronger party. If I do not come to you at 5, you are not to tarry for me, but to fall on. This is by the King's special command, for the good and safety of the country, that these miscreants be cut off root and branch. See that this be put in execution without feud or favour, else you may expect to be dealt with as one not true to king nor government, nor a man fit to carry commission in the king's service. Expecting you will not fail in fulfilling hereof, as you love yourself, I subscribe these with my hand at Ballachulish.
Fuck. Oh my God.
So that's how he found out on the evening of the 12th.
Oh, Jesus. That these people he's been staying with, presumably becoming very pally with, because you would if you were living with someone for a week and a half.
At least amicable.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, this is great, we're having a good time, it's all good. Oh, great, now I have to murder every single one of you.
Every person under the age of 70.
Under the age of 70. It's a really weird cut-off.
Yeah, people didn't live as long.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow.
Those were the actual written orders.
Wow.
And there's a reason that we know that this is what the order said, which I'll get into later. And these orders were delivered by hand by a man called Captain Thomas Drummond, who was also Glenlyon's senior officer.
Oh.
And I read that this was probably on purpose, because if you notice in the orders, there's a lot about him having to do this, and if he doesn't do this, then he will be punished.
Oh yeah.
It seems like they knew that he would be a bit wobbly about what he had to do, so the senior officer arrived, gave him the orders, and then stayed to make sure that this was done.
Well, yeah, because it's do unto them or have it done unto you.
Yeah, to a point. Which is why I'm not convinced that he's a complete monster.
No.
I think he made a bad call, but, you know, it's one of those impossible situations that you don't really know how you'd react unless it was you.
Well, exactly. Like, he did the wrong thing, but if he'd done nothing, he probably would have died. Because if that was a king's order and he refuses it...
That's treason.
That's treason. As he would have been put to death.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Mm-hmm. Also on the 12th, Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton, who we talked about, he was Dalrymple's favourite at Fort William. He was ordered to take 400 men from Fort William to block the way out of Glencoe to the north. And Lieutenant Colonel Hill, he was the other one, he was the one that ordered Hamilton to do this. Mm-hmm. So he was in on the plot, he knew. Major Duncanson was the one who had written those orders. He was going to lead his 400 men north from the southern end of the glen. So they were going to start at the southern end, they were going to work their way north, and they were going to destroy everything and everyone that they found. Their orders were to burn everything and kill everyone.
Oh, this is so much worse than what I learned about in primary school.
Yeah, sorry. So there's no escape to the north.
Oh.
There's no escape to the south. And the soldiers who are living in your home have just been ordered to kill you.
It's just kind of a lot.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
Yeah. So Glenlyon received these orders in the evening of the 12th of February. His order said that he had to start the attack at 5 a.m. the next morning. So, on the 13th of February, 1692, Glenlyon led his men to begin the slaughter of the MacDonalds.
It's very ominous that it's the 13th.
Yeah.
Not as a superstitious person.
And presumably he had to do this just hours after he had found out what he had to do.
Yeah. Tomorrow morning, this is what's happening.
And by all accounts, it was awful.
How could it be anything but?
The soldiers, they were settled in several different villages through the Glen, which I think I said, but they coordinated the attack. So even though they were stationed in different villages, the attack began at 5 a.m. in all of them. And stories from that morning vary wildly, as you'd imagine. In some of the stories, MacDonald families were pulled out of their beds by the men that had been sharing their home. Their hands and feet were tied and they were killed. Just on the ground outside. Several stories surfaced that concerned Glenlyon in particular. In one story, a small boy ran over to him and started clinging at his legs, shaking with fear. And the boy began wailing and pleading with Glenlyon not to kill him. And he says that he'd follow Glenlyon anywhere, he'd do anything he wanted, just don't kill him. Apparently Glenlyon hesitated because he could see how afraid this young boy was and he didn't want to kill a child. But before he could do anything, Captain Drummond shot the boy. And there are also reports that Glenlyon tried to save or spare 2 men, but they were killed by someone else.
Fucking hell.
The clan chief, McKeon, he was murdered that day. He didn't survive. Soldiers forced their way into his room, and apparently he was shot in the head as he was getting dressed after shouting to his servants to get food and drink for their guests because he'd heard them come in.
There are no words.
No. This is why I feel like I don't know how it translates to people who live in other places. I feel like if you live in the Highlands, this gets you, like...
Yeah.
It gets you in a different place. It's weird. I can't explain it. Maybe it doesn't do that to everybody.
Don't know.
These same soldiers cornered McKeon's wife in their house, stole the clothes off her back because they could sell them, and then they hacked off her fingers because they couldn't pull her rings off while she was still alive. And she didn't die until the next day.
It's just horrendous.
There are other stories that came out about that morning which are slightly more positive, which, you know, I'm glad about because it's something. A man called Auchan Triater, I'm probably saying that wrong, he was up early with his family that morning, just by chance, and they were all awake when a soldier called Sergeant Barber forced his way into their home. They were all awake, they were sitting around the fire. The soldiers opened fire on the man and his family, killing almost all of them, except the man's brother, who was the only one who wasn't mortally wounded by the soldiers. And he knew he was about to die, so he stared them fully in the face. He stared them down, and he didn't ask for mercy. The only thing that he asked of them was to be allowed to die under the open air. So the soldiers, who had just killed his entire family, agreed, because they were the soldiers who had been staying in their home.
Yeah.
And they felt that they owed it to him for the hospitality that they'd received. So he stood up, but instead of walking out into the pitch black morning, he rushed at the soldiers and he threw his plaid over their faces so they couldn't see anything, and then he was gone.
Wow.
He managed to escape.
That's incredible.
And remember, the MacDonalds knew this area and the landscape better than anyone.
Yeah.
So if anyone was going to survive in the mountains surrounding Glencoe, it was going to be them. Because they knew where to go and they knew how to hide. In more good news-ish, 2 of McKeon's sons survived the attack.
Oh.
Now, one story goes that they were able to gather up survivors as they were escaping, like I said, and they led them to Appin, where they were saved and they were protected by the Stuarts who lived there. And apparently each of his sons were woken up because servants who worked in their house woke them. They heard the attack and woke them in time, and they were able to escape with their families because of them. I also read a slightly different version of what happened with the eldest of McKeon's sons, who was called John MacDonald. And again, this is from Macaulay's History, so you can take it with a pinch of salt, but this is what he said. Late in the evening, so 12th of February, a vague suspicion that some evil was intended crossed the mind of the chief's eldest son. The soldiers were evidently in a restless state, and some of them uttered strange cries. 2 men, it is said, were overheard whispering. "I do not like this job," one of them muttered. "I should be glad to fight the MacDonalds, but to kill men in their beds." "We must do as we are bid," answered another voice. "If there's anything wrong, our officers must answer for it." John MacDonald was so uneasy that soon after midnight he went to Glenlyan's quarters, his father.
McKeon?
Glenlyan was the head of the soldiers who were there. I beg your pardon. Glenlyan and his men were all up and seemed to be getting their arms ready for action. John, much alarmed, asked what these preparations meant. Glenlyan was profuse of friendly assurances. "Some of Glengarry's people have been harrying the country. We are getting ready to march against them. You are quite safe. Do you think that if you were in danger, I should not have given a hint to your brother Sandy and his wife?" John's suspicions were quieted. He returned to his house and lay down to rest. So if that's true, that's Glenlyan talking about his own niece and her husband. And if this is true, John was probably woken by a servant not long after this, telling him that they needed to leave.
Yeah. I just can't even.
Numbers vary for how many people were actually killed that day. It's difficult to know. It's anywhere from 25 to 38, but it's unconfirmed. There's also mixed reports as to whether survivors actually ventured out into the wilderness. No one knows if the cold led to further deaths or not, because it's February in Glencoe. You get some of the lowest temperatures across Scotland in Glencoe and that area. So it's impossible to know if further deaths were caused by exposure. Pardon me. Some stories talk about survivors making their way through the glen to safety. And there's actually a part of Glencoe called the Hidden Valley, which is apparently where some of them were able to hide themselves from the soldiers because they knew how to get there and the soldiers didn't. But the fact that about 38 people died is horrendous.
Yeah.
Especially because it happened that way.
Well, if there'd just been a battle and 38 people had died, that would have been weirdly been better. But to be so utterly betrayed and slaughtered.
That's why the stories lingered so long.
Yeah.
But the number could actually have been a lot higher than this if it weren't for several somewhat fortunate things happening in the run-up to 5 a.m. when the attack started. Firstly, Hamilton and Duncanson, they were the ones who were each leading 400 men at either side of the glen.
Yep.
They each arrived later than they were supposed to. They were supposed to get to where Glenlyan was at 5 a.m.
Yep.
But they didn't arrive until hours after the attack was over.
Oh.
So they didn't block off the glen like they had hoped, which meant people could escape.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I think one of the two of them didn't arrive until like 11 a.m. When they were supposed to have made their way up the glen long before then.
It's a big old glen, you know. It's a long way to come.
I'm not sure what the reason for this was, but they were both late. I think one of them arrived at 7. Secondly, Glenlyan fucked up his orders.
Oh.
Remember Dalrymple had said that he needed secrecy for this to work. Well, Glenlyan and his men started shooting the MacDonalds from the beginning. And the sounds of gunshots rang through the whole glen.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with steep valleys, but noises echo, especially loud noises. So the sound of gunfire alerted people that something was wrong before it could reach them, basically.
Well, because in my head it would be all like cloak and dagger, ring wraiths into the inn.
Yeah, that's what Dalrymple wanted. He wanted it stealthy, he wanted it quick, and he didn't want the MacDonalds to know what was happening. But whether on purpose or not, Glenlyon used an ordered gunfire.
Yeah. Maybe in his head that was a small mercy.
Well, maybe, because maybe he was hoping that other people would hear the shots. But that's what happened. The third thing that may have helped the MacDonalds that day were the soldiers themselves.
Oh.
I bet you weren't expecting that.
No.
I spoke earlier about Highland life and Highland culture and tradition and how hospitality was extremely important. Everyone knew the rules that surrounded both having guests in your home and being a guest in someone's home. And a lot of the men who were serving in Argyll's regiment, who were the soldiers stationed in Glencoe, were either Highlanders themselves or considered themselves Highlanders. So this meant when they were given their orders by the superiors, a lot of them felt really uneasy at what they had to do because it felt wrong.
As I'm glad it did.
Yeah. To them, this wasn't a battle. This was murder. There's no honour in murder.
Yeah.
And lots of stories have emerged from that morning about ways that the soldiers tried to warn the MacDonalds of what was coming without actually coming out and telling them, which would have gone against their orders. The historian John Preble, he talks about this and he describes it really well, the position that they were in. So I'm going to read just a little bit of what he wrote to you. The Campbells of Argyll's regiment were Highland, and the inviolability of hospitality was as sacred to them as to any other clan. Murder under trust was as great a sin. This is remembered in the stories which the Glencoe people told for another 150 years. Confused and contradictory though the legends became, they do record the truth that some of the Argyll men were revolted by the orders given them, and that within the oath of obedience they had taken, they attempted to warn the people. And for each warning remembered by the MacDonalds, there may have been another forgotten. When the order was given 2 hours before dawn on Saturday, there were soldiers who killed no one, who turned their backs on running shadows, who heard no frightened breathing in the dark. That was Kieran's chair.
It wasn't a gunshot.
No, there was something about the way he described that really got to me. It's so vivid.
That's wonderfully put.
But, you know, it's that thing where they've taken their oath of service that they have to do what they've been told or they will be shot. But they're trying to find the loopholes within the oath that they can use that fit with their own moral compass. So they can pretend they don't see the person hiding further up the hill, or they can pretend that they missed. Things like that.
I can't remember what I was reading. I read something recently about people who go to war, but in the World Wars who get called up for service, that it's like when the charge was happening, it's something like 75% of people aim up. They just aim completely over the heads of the enemy because it's just the natural thing to do. Like, it's not necessarily natural to shoot to kill, unless you are like a completely trained soldier or whatever, like people obviously do. But almost everybody in the charge aims up and shoots. I imagine this is a similar... Oh no, I was firing at them, but in actuality you're shooting at the clouds.
Well, yeah, because who's going to know?
Yeah.
So in one tale, a soldier is sitting with the family who are putting him up, and he's petting their dog. And he's been given his orders, he knows what he has to do the following morning. So he turns to the dog, and he says, "If I were you, I'd make my bed in the heather tonight." And after he says this, the soldier pretends to go to sleep for the night. The family understood the warning, and while he pretended not to hear them because he was asleep, they gathered up what they could and they fled, and they escaped.
Wow.
So it's that kind of middle ground. He didn't say anything. Well,
because that seems the best he can do, I think, morally. without forfeiting his life for theirs. Because that's, like, to me, that's too much to ask.
It's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Not impossible, but a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it would be like the most noble thing to do, but I think it's not something I could do.
But then, he wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, they're not here. What could I have done?
Oh, they escaped. They must have grown wise. I didn't say anything. That's so weird. I said nothing to them.
I said nothing to them about the attack.
Yeah.
In another story, a Campbell soldier this time is admiring the plaid worn by his MacDonald host. They're talking, and he tells him, were this plaid mine, I would put it on my shoulders and go look after my cattle tonight. I would take my family with me and go make sure my cattle are in a safe place. And this went the same way as the last story. The head of the family knew what Campbell was telling him, gathered his family, and they were able to save themselves. They hid in the hills.
Very nice.
Stories are told about a man called Hugh Mackenzie, who was the piper of Glenlyon, because each clan had different pipe tunes that represented them and had different meanings. And, if you were a high rank, you'd have your own piper that would pipe your regiment into battle. All that good stuff. Mackenzie apparently found out about the plot that was going to happen the next morning, and he decided that he had to try and do something. So what he did was he stood on a large granite boulder, a big stone, and he began to play, and he chose a lament. I think that's how you say it. I've seen that written down a lot, but I don't think I've ever said it. He chose a lament called Women of the Glen. And he hoped that the MacDonalds would hear him piping, and they would know that hearing the lament meant that something terrible was about to happen. It was his way of trying to give them a warning with that pipe tune that they would recognise.
Interesting. I like that.
And there's even another story from this day that involves the same stone. And this stone is still in Glencoe. You can go see it. It's called the Henderson Stone. It's still there. Apparently a soldier was out at this stone with his host again, and the guilt of the coming attack just overtook him. He couldn't take it anymore. So he leant down to the stone, placed his hand on it, and said, "Great stone in the glen, though you have every right to be here, if you knew what was to happen in the coming hours, you would not stay here on any account." And then the host heard the warning that the soldier had said to the stone and fled.
Jeez, oh. It's just so horrible for everyone involved. Yeah. Like the feeling...
Except the people who didn't have to do it.
Oh, well, yeah.
That's the worst. The people who ordered it didn't have to do it. I doubt it played on their conscience.
No, probably not. I bet Mr. Wimple was just pleased as punch that he got rid of all these savages.
There were rumours after the massacre had happened that there was a section of Clan Campbell that lived at Castle Stalker. And apparently this group of Campbells, they took in a lot of the MacDonalds who had managed to flee from Glencoe.
Wow. Because
it's the right thing to do. They had gone to them for help. Highland hospitality dictates if someone comes to you for help and they need somewhere to stay, you let them in. And they did. Even though it was a lot of the Campbells who had just committed...
Yeah.
The murder. Castle Stalker is an interesting, cool place itself, actually. It's a castle that's on a little island in the middle of a loch.
Oh, cool.
And the Stuarts and the Campbells fought over it for a really long time. It passed between them both. It's very cool. Just side note. I don't know how true this next story is. I've heard conflicting things. But apparently there were two men called Francis Facker and Gilbert Kennedy. And I think there's a connection to the Kennedys at Culzean Castle. I couldn't find the link. They were part of Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton's force at Kinlochleven. They were part of the 400 men. And they found out what they were being ordered to do. And instead of taking part in moving up the glen and killing who they found there, they actually broke their swords and refused to go.
Wow.
They wanted no part in it. And I saw in one place that they were imprisoned and charged with insubordination, but then later they gave evidence against their superior officer, but I couldn't find any proof, so I don't know. But it adds to this feeling that the soldiers didn't want to do what they were being told to.
How could you? How could you just be like, sweet, chill, let's do this, that's fine. Oh, this is painful. This is actually painful.
Yeah. This is why this took so long.
Yeah.
So the massacre was over. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were completely expelled from their homes, or they had been murdered with their families in their beds. And then again, there's mixed reports as to how many people escaped into the hills or died out there. Mm-hmm. We'll never know. Houses had been completely burned to the ground and destroyed. Cattle and livestock had been stolen by the government forces and taken away. And after all this had happened, not very many people were upset.
Really?
Yeah, like a lot of the people in power were not bothered by this at all.
Fucking hell.
Dalrymple, the arsehole, he's considered the mastermind of this entire killing, but he was actually angry at how it had all gone because McKeon's sons had managed to escape.
Well, yeah, if he wanted it, what was it, root and branch?
Mm-hmm. He had explicitly ordered the soldiers to make sure that they were killed and they got away. So Dalrymple went even further than just being angry, because he heard about that and he heard that there were other survivors of the attack. So he decided he wanted the survivors of Glencoe to be rounded up and killed, or sent abroad into exile. Even after surviving this, that's what he wanted done. But his orders were ignored. But he wanted to systematically wipe out this entire clan of people.
What a monster.
Right? And part of the general feeling of unbotheredness by the people in power, the military commander of Scotland for the government, he was a man called Viscount Teviot.
Oofed.
He wrote, "It's not anyone thinks the thieving tribe did not deserve to be destroyed, but that it should have been done by those quartered amongst them makes a great noise." So, you know, they deserve to die, but just not in that way.
Yeah.
That's the military commander.
Fucking hell. It's a hell of a reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Now, from what I could see, one person, one of the only senior figures who took part in all of this, felt an ounce of guilt for what they had done. And that was Glenlyon, Robert Campbell. It seems that the massacre haunted him for the rest of his life, that he never got over what he had done. He died a few years later in 1696 in Belgium, in Bruges, with a really bad drinking problem. He had no money to his name, he had nothing, he was miserable, and he was buried in an unmarked grave.
Well, if he had a drinking problem anyway, that's like, if anything's going to exacerbate it.
A lot of descriptions of him after that time described that Glencoe was forever etched on his face. That you could tell that that's where his mind always was, and he never got over it.
How could you? How can you just go on after that, unless you're an actual psychopath?
Mm-hmm. Before he died, though, in 1692, so just in the same year that the attack had happened, but a little later, Glenlyon had supposedly been drinking at a bar in Edinburgh. And he seemed extremely mournful, tortured. People commented on that if they saw him. But remember the orders that I read out to you earlier? Mm-hmm. The orders that he was given the night before the attack. There's a reason that those orders existed long enough for me to be able to tell them to you. The story goes that he was drinking in Edinburgh. He was very drunk. And the orders fell out of his pocket.
Oh, shit.
He kept them on his person. They fell out of his pocket and then he left, but they stayed in the bar. And the bit of paper was picked up. People realised what this was, and it was taken to France. And they were published in the Paris Gazette.
Wow.
Because France and England weren't getting on at this point. Tensions were high. And these orders made King William III look really bad. Because this was on the King's command, remember?
Yeah.
The wording was very specific. So these were published in the newspaper. But other than sort of lively debate, nothing really happened.
Well, how could it? The Kings didn't face justice for basically anything they ever did.
Yeah, still don't.
Yeah.
Like Prince Andrew, same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
In May 1695, 3 years later, a law expired in England that I'm not going to get too much into it, but it basically meant that the rules around the press became more relaxed. And it broadened what you were allowed to print.
Oh, okay.
And as a result, more and more people were releasing these pamphlets that criticised the government and criticised the king, because they weren't allowed to do that before. And one of these pamphlets that was released revealed the truth of what had happened at Glencoe 3 years earlier. It was within the scheme of using this pamphlet to kind of criticise the king, but it was in there. Someone was finally talking about it. By this time, the MacDonalds had actually moved back into Glencoe.
Oh, wow.
And McKeon's eldest son had built a new home on the spot where his father's house had been. He became clan chief.
Wow.
But there had been no justice or retribution at all. And this pamphlet that talked about Glencoe for the first time, really, was written by a man called Charles Leslie, who I think was Irish, but he was a Jacobite. And he used the pamphlet to lay blame at King William's door. Basically making the point that was completely true, that it was King William's orders that this murder had happened. And this pamphlet caused more outrage and rumblings than there had been before at all. It was published fairly widely, and lots of people read it and might have found out for the first time what had actually happened. So a commission was created to look into what had happened at Glencoe. I know this seems like a good thing. I'm not going to set you up for any kind of failure. This is not a good thing.
Well, it's like the government, we've made a commission to look into this huge blunder, and we've checked it, and we've decided we didn't do anything.
Yes, that's pretty much exactly what's about to happen.
I'm glad you've decided that, Boris Johnson.
This commission had a pretty focused goal. It had to decide whether or not the actions of the soldiers that day could be deemed something called slaughter under trust.
I mean, that sounds like exactly what happened.
Right? This was an act that was introduced way before, in 1587, by King James VI and First. And it was something that was brought in to try and stop the clans feuding with each other. And it was a law that basically said, if a clan chief was found to have killed his enemy while pretending to make peace, then that clan chief could be punished with death, the loss of his land, and the loss of rights for his heirs. They would get nothing.
Sounds good. Sounds fine.
Right, right. So the commission was trying to decide if this is what the government forces were guilty of doing.
Absolutely was. 100%.
Right?
Clearly.
It was false. They were pretending to be...
Yeah.
Anyway. One thing I read is that a killing could only be slaughter under trust if it was deemed to be something called cold-blooded, which is basically the old-fashioned term for premeditated. So it's not something that you did in the heat of the moment, unplanned.
Yeah.
This killing, this murder, had to have been planned out and, thought of ahead of time. That was one of the requirements for slaughter under trust.
So is it going to be that because they didn't know that's what they were about to do, it's not what happened?
Well, one of the other problems and one of the other requirements for a murder being cold-blooded is that the soldiers accepted the hospitality of the MacDonalds.
Which they did.
They did, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That was one of the requirements. That's what they did. So their actions were deemed to be cold-blooded.
Yeah.
So it was slaughter under trust. And this was a tricky place for the commission to be in, because if this is true, the order had come from the king,
Yep.
which meant the king had done this. But the commission was under the king's jurisdiction.
Yeah. Yes.
This is why it wasn't fit for purpose.
No.
So what do you do as the commission?
Cover it up.
You blame other people. Yeah. William had signed the order to carry out the killing. That was proven. That it couldn't be denied. But what could be denied is how much William was actually aware of. That old thing. Thomas Macaulay, the historian that I mentioned earlier, he went out of his way in his book, The History, to clear William of any wrongdoing at all. He was a major King William fanboy.
Oh.
That was basically the purpose of his book, which is why I said at the beginning not to trust everything he says.
Is this the really old book you're reading?
Yes.
When was this book published? Because I thought this was like a contemporary history.
No, it was either, I think it was the 1800s.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember exactly. But he was basically retroactively trying to clear William's name of any guilt. So this is what he said. This was his reasoning for why William was innocent. I know you're excited to hear it.
Does use the word technically a lot. Technically, he didn't do anything wrong, because technically this is what happened.
William had, in all probability, never heard the Glencoe men mentioned except as banditti. He knew that they had not come in by the prescribed day. That they had come in after that day he did not know. If he paid any attention to the matter, he must have thought that so fair an opportunity of putting an end to the devastations and depredations from which a quiet and industrious population had suffered so much ought not to be lost. An order was laid before him for signature. He signed it, but, if Burnet may be trusted, did not read it. Now, isn't that convenient?
Well, that's good, isn't it? Oh, I had no idea. Aye, okay. Oh.
There's so many things from that book that are super biased.
Yeah, that's...
So many things.
That rages me out.
Well, it's only going to get worse. I have other choice quotes for you.
No.
At one point, he referred to the MacDonalds in Glencoe as a den of robbers. And this is how he describes Glencoe itself, if you're interested. That pass is the most dreary and melancholy of all the Scottish passes. The impression made by the landscape is sad and awful. All the science and industry of a peaceful age can extract nothing valuable from that wilderness. But in an age of violence, the wilderness itself was valued on account of the shelter which it afforded to the plunderer and his plunder. Nothing could be more natural than that the clan to which this rugged desert belonged should have been noted for predatory habits. He's such a dick.
Such a dick.
But I wouldn't take his opinion too seriously, because I looked into him as a person, and he's basically a white supremacist who played a major part in wiping out ancient culture and tradition in India as part of extending the British Empire.
Oh, fuck.
He's a dick. I looked into him even further. His dad was part of the, movement to abolish slavery. And then there's this guy.
How?
Yeah. Bulk.
Going back a step to the pamphlets, I never realised how, powerful pamphlets could be, because I was reading about a guy whose name begins with an R, who I have forgotten, Rosem something or other, in France, and he was one of the leaders of ousting the French royals.
Oh, yeah.
And it was his, because he was a really powerful writer and a really compelling writer, and he just wrote loads of pamphlets which got everybody all riled up and ready to revolt against the royals and re-establish anything. I'm like, just from pamphlets, but it's like Facebook now, isn't it? It's
how else did you spread information?
Yeah.
And it's cheaper than printing books.
Yep. He had an untimely end because he then became really powerful and really wealthy, and so the peasants revolted against him and he got murdered. And then there was one statue made for him, and it was in Soviet Russia, but it was during communism, so it wasn't made properly and it crumbled.
Oh dear. That's not good.
Yeah, which is kind of hilarious. Anyway.
Well, basically this commission was searching not for the truth and not for justice after they kind of discovered that, the king was at fault. They were searching for a scapegoat. That would basically mean that the king could be let off with everything that he had ordered to be done.
Naturally.
And Dalrymple was the one who got it.
I was about to say, it must be him.
And it was because there was so much written evidence that he had it out for the Highlanders, because he had written so many letters.
Yeah, because he very clearly had it out for the Highlanders.
Yeah, and he had it out for the Glencoe MacDonalds in particular.
Yeah.
There was proof, so people could point to that. Dalrymple and Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton, the guy that he liked at Fort William, they were the main people held accountable. But even then, it was lukewarm at best.
Yeah.
Nothing really happened. It was decided by the commission that they had exceeded their orders. Basically, that Dalrymple had misinterpreted what the king had wanted, even though he didn't.
No.
But what they did at Glencoe that day was never deemed illegal.
Oh, technically it's their fault. Oh, you Grr, you shouldn't have done that.
I'm the king. It's not my fault you misinterpreted what I said.
Oh, that's not what I said. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Isn't it awful?
It's so awful.
Breadalbane, the Campbell chief who I talked about, he was also put under the microscope. And it seemed a bit unfair because he was quite vocal after the fact that what they had done was wrong. Mm-hmm. He wasn't there that day, I don't think. But he panicked that he was going to be the one that would be punished for it. So he actually wrote to the MacDonalds, asking them to sign a document that would exonerate him from blame for what happened. And unsurprisingly, he never got a reply. They never forgave him for anything.
Good.
Mm-hmm. And then, on top of that, the commission decided all of this, who was at fault and, what had actually happened, yada yada. After they'd done all this, the commission deferred to the king to decide what should be done and how they should be punished. So, everyone involved was pardoned
I saw that
for the massacre. Dalrymple was sacked. He was no longer Secretary of State for Scotland, but he was back in government by 1700.
Ugh.
And then he was made an Earl by Queen Anne. Pretty much every senior figure who took part in the Glencoe Massacre in any way were given some kind of promotion, whether it was through military or the aristocracy. There were people made colonels, knights, peers, earls, all of them. They were all rewarded. And I didn't know this, but because of Dalrymple's actions, the 9 of diamonds in a pack of cards became known as the Curse of Scotland. Because the 9 of diamonds looks like Dalrymple's family crest.
Oh, that's funny.
Which I never knew.
I didn't know that either.
The survivors of Glencoe, like I said, moved back and started to rebuild and everything. But they applied to the government for compensation because their lives were ruined.
Yeah.
And they were completely ignored. They never heard anything from anyone.
Fucking hell.
And it wasn't until much later, when the Jacobite risings were happening in 1715 and 1745, that Glencoe kind of came back to the consciousness of the people. Because Bonnie Prince Charlie had that original pamphlet that I talked about reprinted.
Oh, wow.
Because it supported his cause. And naturally, the MacDonalds took part in both of the Jacobite risings.
They would have headed the charge, I'm sure.
Because duh.
Yeah.
In the 1800s, Sir Walter Scott wrote a poem called Massacre of Glencoe, which broadened how many people knew what had happened further. And sort of since then, as people have been studying Scottish history more and more, there was a real resurgence in the 1950s of people studying Scottish history properly. That's really when it became such a well-known story. It wasn't at the time when it happened.
That's interesting.
People just they didn't know, or it's just a thing that happened.
Yeah.
In more modern times, there's now a museum in Glencoe. I think it's the Glencoe Folk Museum, with some artefacts from the area and artefacts from the Jacobite risings generally. And they actually have a book that belonged to Glenlyon, which was found in a secret room in Glenlyon House, which is where Robert Campbell had lived before he went to France and Belgium. And it's really interesting because he had left his belongings there before he left the country. Like, he never came back to Scotland. He died in Bruges, like I said.
Oh, yeah.
So he left all of his things in Glenlyon House, and his family were so ashamed of what he had done. They put everything into this room and they boarded it up. They pretended that the room didn't exist. They just papered over it.
There's quite a lot of secret rooms in castles.
Yeah.
All the castles we've been in, there's always this room was uncovered after this accidental thing happened.
Well, this was why. They were so ashamed of him that they just locked all of his things away and forgot about it.
Crazy.
And the only reason it was discovered was because in more recent times, people were examining the house. Or I don't even think it was recent. I think it might have been early 1900s. I can't remember. They were examining the house and they realised there was a window that didn't correspond with any of the rooms.
That's what the Glam's Castle monster is.
Yeah, they spotted it and went, well, we don't know what room that is. So they went to where the door should be and found it and opened it up again. And then still, the family who were there, they didn't want anything to do with Robert Campbell's stuff. So they said to the staff, take what you want.
Crazy.
Yeah. Isn't that insane?
That is insane.
And he wasn't the only Campbell who suffered after Glencoe. The clan's reputation as a whole never recovered. Ever. The Clackaig Inn, I think that's how you say it, is an inn that's in Glencoe. And it still has a sign that says no hawkers or Campbells. It's meant as a joke now, but for a long time, Campbells were mistrusted and even hated for what they had taken part in. They were seen as just government lackeys.
Yeah.
And it was a custom for a long time to make the devil's horn sign with your hand, like the rock hand, and spit at Inverary Castle as you went past. And for a while, I read it was even customary to take a Campbell's knives away from them if you were eating dinner with them.
Oh, I'll be taking those.
Thank you very much.
No, not trusting you with that. Not in my house.
Been here before.
Yep.
And the Campbell curse is something that gets talked about a lot. Because after Glencoe, their fortunes never really recovered. Bad luck hounded the clan forever. They almost disappeared completely from Scotland because so many of them moved abroad. And the last of their ancestral lands were sold in 1948. So they were once one of the most powerful clans in Scotland, and now, they're far more diminished.
I don't really know any Campbells. There's only one Campbell family I've ever known.
It's rarer now, I think.
Depends on the region you're in too, I imagine. But
yeah. Certainly in the Highlands, there's not as many. And the Campbell link to Glencoe has never been forgotten. If anything, it was played up because it made it seem like it was a clan feud that caused it, that the government didn't play a part in it. That it was just Campbells and MacDonalds out to kill each other.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. When that's not what it was at all. It was the actions of government and king pursuing an agenda.
I wonder if the Campbell fortune never recovered, partly because all the ones who took part just got PTSD because they had to commit an atrocity and then never really recovered from it.
Maybe, but it wasn't all the Campbells.
Well, that's true, eh? Just all those ones.
A lot of legends still linger around Glencoe, as you would expect. Lots of people have reported being in the Glen on the anniversary of the slaughter, on the 13th of February, and seeing what they can only describe as ghostly reenactments of the massacre. People have seen shadowy figures crouching and hiding among the rocks that they can't really see properly, and hearing just disembodied screams and wails throughout the Glen when nobody is screaming. What's even more eerie, though, is considering all of this happening when the name Glencoe translates from Gaelic to mean the Valley of Weeping.
Ooh. That's
creepy.
That is a creepy coincidence.
All in all, it's possibly the most horrific moment in Scottish history. It's certainly up there.
Gotta be up there, because
it goes against everything that we believe in.
Yeah.
But that is the story of the Glencoe Massacre.
Oh, jeez, oh. Maybe they should have been our Halloween episode. Way more harrowing. Oh.
I don't think Kieran's okay.
I'm not okay. Because that is just so brutally unjust.
It really lodges in your brain.
It does.
And itches at a bit you can't scratch because it's just not right. And just the fact that nothing was done.
Yeah.
There's a memorial in Glencoe now.
Yeah, and people know, but it
doesn't help them, though.
Too little, too late, isn't it?
What do you think? How are you feeling? Tell the people.
Wrecked. Emotionally wrung out. Raging. Fucked off. All those good things.
That's the place I've been in for days.
Yeah. It was you 3 a.m. last night. I mean, those motherfuckers.
Well, yeah, and I was so tired. When it was getting past midnight, I was getting to the more emotional parts of the story, and I was really struggling because, I was already tired. I was up by myself in the middle of the night, and it just, when you think about it too long, and when you get into the headspace of the people who suffered, it's really difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
I don't like lingering on it too long because it just makes me feel things.
It's too upsetting.
Yeah, it's... Everything about it is awful. Every circumstance of it is awful.
Yeah, for everyone who was there.
And there's just something about the fact that they lived with them for over a week as their guests, and then they killed them all. Can't deal with it.
No. Can you imagine just, like, having this good time? Well, I mean, if you're having a good time, like, yeah, everyone's all together having a good time, and then seeing all the soldiers become somber. Because you would, like, they wouldn't just be able to carry on as normal.
Well, it's like that story of McKeon's son noticing that they're really restless.
Yeah.
And some of them are, like, crying out and acting strangely.
Because knowing you have to do that, like, if you were one of the soldiers who's just a soldier, and you're there like, oh, sweet, yeah, we'll do this, and yep, you're all good, this is just to make peace, and then finding out, oh, this family who I've really gotten to know, I have to murder them all tomorrow.
I have to murder them and their children.
Them and their children in their sleep. In 12 hours. Like that.
Like, you can't even imagine. And yeah, I think that's what makes it it makes it a story that resonates so deeply.
Drive you to insanity.
Yeah. Well, you'll be glad to hear that I have somewhat of a cheerier episode for the finale. Originally, this was going to be the finale.
It would have been a very powerful finale, to be fair.
I had this planned as the finale, but then you and I talked about it and we thought, end on the high instead of the crushing, emotional low. Which I'm glad of, because Kieran is really not coping. You can't see him. He's struggling.
That'd just be me bummed out till Christmas.
I know. Well, I hope you enjoyed it.
Hope you enjoyed. We hope you learned something.
I hope that's not weird to say. I don't mean that you enjoyed the suffering. Yep. Just that you enjoyed learning about the suffering.
If you're a Campbell, you're no longer allowed to listen to this podcast.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
My MacDonald blood forgives you.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're like, yeah, totally. They deserved it. Bunch of thieving assholes.
I do find the story, or like, the reputation of the Campbells kind of funny, considering that so much of my background is MacDonald and Stuart.
Yeah.
Just, I know, it's not on.
No, okay.
Mortal blood enemies.
Mortal enemies.
Not really, but, you know.
Well, thank you all for listening.
Yes, thank you. This is going to be a super long episode. Thank you if you've made it this far.
Send us your spooky stories.
Yes.
To generallyspooky@gmail.com.
We want to hear them. We really, really do. Please don't worry if you feel like you don't write well or it's not long enough. Don't worry about any of that. We want to hear it.
And it can be anonymous if you want to be anonymous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't have to share your name if you don't want to.
No.
Or even if you share your name with me but you don't want me to say it on the podcast, that's totally fine.
That's totally fine.
Don't think there are any other orders of business?
Nope. We shall see you all next week for the finale.
For the finale of season 2, people.
I'm gonna go and sit quietly for a bit.
I'm gonna go run Kieran a bubble bath.
We have a nice cup of tea or something.
Yep, and I'm gonna make him sit on the couch and cuddle Odin for a while, and he'll feel better.
Yeah, I'm gonna make some steak pie as well. That'll soothe me, soothe my soul.
And no guests are invited to share it with us.
No. Especially any Campbells.
Thanks for listening, guys.
See you next week.
We'll speak to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.